Thomas Brennan stood on the frozen hillside, his dog pressed against his leg. Before them, the earth breathed steam through a jagged fissure. The sulfur hit the back of his throat first. A rotten egg stench that made his eyes water, but beneath it, something else. Heat. He knelt and pressed his bare palm to a wet stone near the vent. It was hot, not warm, hot. The kind of heat that could last through a mountain winter. The dog sniffed the rising vapor, ears forward, tail stiff. Even the animal knew this place was different from any patch of cold ground. Across the valley, steam vents dotted the snow like dying campfires. The settlers called it cursed ground. Thomas saw a heat sink that never quit. 3 men trudged up the slope. The lead one, Samuel Hart, holding a rag over his nose. His voice cut through the steam before he even reached Thomas.
Smells like the devil's outhouse out here, Brennan. You planning on taking a bath or building a house?
Let them laugh. This ground holds more heat in one breath than their whole woodpile.
Thomas didn't answer. He pulled a mallet from his belt, set a wooden stake against the steaming rock, and drove it deep with 3 hard swings. By the time the echo died, the stake was planted. The cursed spring had a new owner, and the only sound left was the hiss of steam escaping the ground. As autumn waned, Thomas and a hired hand raised the last wall frame. A few snowflakes peppered the air, melting on the hot stones beneath.
Still stewing in that rotten broth. Swamp man, your dog'll be the only one who can stand the smell.
My dog has more sense than half this valley. He knows where the warmth is.
Inside, Thomas knelt on the bare earth, chiseling a stone channel to guide the steam. His hands were calloused, but the rock was warm. He laid the floorboards with deliberate gaps, so the heat would rise evenly through the seams without damp or rot. When the first true blizzard roared in, the cabin was complete. Steam poured from every crack, and the window glowed amber.
20 below by morning, they said. Inside here, it's barely cool enough to need a blanket.
The dog stretched full length on the floor, his coat rising and falling with the steam. He never whimpered, never shivered. From the ridge, a passerby might see what looked like a smoking ruin. Thomas knew better. It was the one cabin that wouldn't be buried cold. He stood at the frosted glass and listened. The first test was here. The spring had to hold. The storm passed, but the cold deepened. Thomas needed only a small cooking fire. The floor kept the rest. He knelt by the steaming grate and planted seeds in a box of soil. The steam warmed the earth.
Spinach by midwinter. Kale before spring if the steam keeps steady.
Within days, pale sprouts reached for the frosty window. The dog sniffed them, then settled on the warm floor. A neighbor hauling firewood paused on the ridge. The cabin below whispered smoke, yet its roof steamed. Every other house burned through wood by the hour. Thomas saw the man staring. He turned to his seeds and spoke to the dog.
Let them count their logs. We count warmth that never runs out.
Inside, Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead, while others shivered over their axes. The valley watched his steaming roof and whispered. The spring held. The test had only begun. The warmth carried a hidden cost. By midwinter, the cabin reeked of sulfur, thick enough to sting the eyes. Thomas woke coughing, his chest burning. The dog whimpered, pressing close to his side.
This heat will kill me if I can't push the rot out.
He spent a day stacking flat stones over the main vent, building a hood that guided the fumes upward. The dog watched as the first pungent clouds climbed the stone chimney and dispersed. By evening, Thomas breathed easily. The heat remained steady, but the poison was gone. He turned to his garden. The greens had loved the steady warmth, their leaves dark and strong. He harvested a basket of spinach, crisp, despite the frost on the window.
Salt pork and hardtack out there. Here, fresh greens in February.
He ate his first real salad since autumn, while outside, the settlement's woodpiles shrank day by day. The cold deepened until it bit through every wall. Samuel Hart's youngest daughter lay in a corner, her cough turning wet.
She won't last another week without real warmth, and I am out of wood to burn.
He swallowed his pride like a jagged stone and trudged through the snow to the steaming cabin. Thomas opened the door. Warm steam billowed into the frozen air. The dog stood alert at his heels.
Aye, my girl is sick. I have nothing left to burn. What do you have in here that keeps you alive?
Thomas stepped aside. Samuel entered and felt the heat rise through his boots. He stared at the steaming floor.
The ground. It's warm. You are growing greens in February, while my daughter shivers in the dark.
Take these greens. Let her eat, and bring her near a warm hearth. The spring did this, not me.
Samuel left with a basket of fresh leaves and a mind on fire. The sworn man had walked into the cursed cabin and walked out with a miracle. Within an hour, word spread. The settlement gathered around Samuel's door, demanding to know what he had seen. The next morning, a boy ran from Thomas's cabin toward the settlement, a basket of greens bouncing on his back. The news traveled faster than any horse. At the trading post, the storekeeper weighed a handful of spinach like gold. Thomas stood beside him, silent.
Just greens, but they'd be worth a man's life if the winter holds.
That evening, Caleb Thorne, the settlement leader, called a meeting in the barn. Lanterns pushed back the dark. Faces were thin, worried. The settlement was running out of options.
Brennan's cabin is warm without a fire. He grows vegetables in the snow. I want to hear from him. The spring under my floor gives heat. I can pipe that warm water to other cabins. It stinks, but it doesn't freeze.
His steam saved my daughter. I say we try.
And if the pipes burst, if the sulfur poisons us, we don't know what we're dealing with. You know what you are dealing with without it. Empty woodpiles and frozen graves.
Caleb studied the faces around the barn, then nodded once. One cabin. Prove it works, Brennan. Then we'll talk about more. By first light, Thomas and 3 men were swinging picks at the frozen earth. The ground resisted like iron, but steam vents nearby kept the frost thin. Caleb stood on the slope, arms folded, watching every swing. He said nothing, but his shadow was a deadline.
The water's hottest here. We lay hollowed logs downhill. Gravity does the rest. No pump needed.
They lowered the first trough into the trench. Water hissed through, but by the time it reached the cabin, it was barely warm.
Air's thieving the heat. We need to bury deeper, pack moss tight around the wood.
They dug a second trench, lined it with dry moss and earth, then bound the logs with rawhide so the seams wouldn't leak. This time, when the hot spring water emerged from the pipe, it was still steaming, a thick cloud rising into the freezing air. Inside the neighbor's cabin, a wooden barrel filled with steaming water. The room began to lose its bite.
It's working. The smell is foul, but the warmth is real.
That night, the first cabin outside Thomas's land was warmed by the cursed spring, but one cabin was just a start. The settlement's demand was about to grow. By the next morning, the frozen mist inside the test cabin had vanished. Samuel's daughter sat up, hands reaching for the steaming grate.
She ate a bowl of broth and smiled for the first time in weeks. I owe you, Brennan. We all do.
The story spread through the settlement like heat through the pipes. Families lined up at Caleb's door, begging for the same.
We'll run a second line and a third. Every able man with a pick meets at the spring by noon.
Thomas led the digging, but his mind was on the spring's flow. Too many taps, and the heat would spread thin. By evening, a second cabin steamed from its new barrel. A family huddled close, breathing the wet warmth. The third cabin took longer. The trench froze twice, but Thomas redirected a trickle of warm runoff to keep the ground soft. Inside the third cabin, a woman scrubbed laundry in steaming water for the first time all winter. She wept.
3 cabins now, but the spring only gives so much. If more ask, we'll have to ration. 3 cabins alive. But if the spring cools, we're all back to counting logs.
Within days, the divide hardened. Families without heat accused Thomas of choosing who lived and who froze.
Brennan saved my daughter. He's not playing God, he's using the ground the rest of you are too proud to touch.
The sulfur stench from the new pipes grew thick in closed rooms. Some said the cure was worse than the disease.
The smell is the cost of warmth. You'd rather have clean air and frozen children.
An emergency meeting erupted in the barn. Caleb stood between the factions, his voice lost in the shouting.
Enough. We'll put it to a vote. Expand the pipes to every home, or cap the spring and return to firewood.
The room went silent. Thomas kept one hand on his dog, who had followed him inside, tail low.
If they cap it, my cabin dies too. Every green, every warm board.
The vote was set for first light. Outside, snow fell without mercy, and the woodpiles were barren. All night, families debated around cold stoves. The cursed spring had become their only hope and their greatest fear. At dawn, the barn filled to the rafters. Men and women stood with frost still on their coats, eyes hard and waiting.
I've been sharing my greens with the neediest families since the first harvest. The spring wasn't given to me. It was given to this ground.
He fed my daughter when our stove went cold. I vote to expand, and I'll swing a pick myself.
If we agree to build, every family contributes labor and material. Show of hands.
The vote passed by a thin margin, 15 to 12. The cursed spring would be tapped for the whole settlement.
My pantry will be empty by week's end, but if the pipes hold, we all survive.
After the vote, Thomas opened his cold cellar and started dividing every leaf, every root, every dried herb.
Take this to the digging crew. They'll need strength for the trench.
By dusk, his shelves were bare except for a few seeds in a damp cloth. The dog lay beside the empty planter box. Caleb clasped Thomas's hand. The cursed land just saved this settlement, and it started with a man who listened to the steam. The next day, the whole settlement turned out with picks and axes. The sound of iron on frozen earth filled the valley.
We're racing the next storm. Reports say it'll be the worst yet. Move faster.
Thomas drove himself harder than any man there. He slept in snatches, ate less, and never left the trench.
Garden's dying, but the pipes come first.
His cabin garden wilted as he spent every day at the worksite. The dog followed, whimpering. The dog pressed close, even when tempers flared and the work grew desperate. On the 6th day, Thomas stumbled. His pick clattered into the snow.
Grab him. He's burning up.
They carried him inside and laid him on the warm floor. The dog crawled onto his chest. Outside, the tank was nearly sealed. The last pipes were set. But Thomas lay still, and the sky darkened with coming snow. By the 3rd day, the storm came. But inside every cabin, warmth rose from the floors, and frost melted from the windows. That evening, the hall filled with laughter for the first time in months. Children ran across the steaming floors. Thomas lay on his warm floor, the dog a heavy weight on his chest. The distant sound of music drifted through the snow.
They made it. They don't need me anymore.
Caleb stood among the settlers, a tin cup raised high.
To Thomas Brennan. He built over a stinking hole and gave us a spring of life.
A cheer shook the roof. Thomas heard it from his bed.
I am not forgotten, even now.
The dog's tail thumped once. Thomas let his eyes close. The storm howled outside, but it couldn't touch them. For the first time, the settlement belonged to winter and didn't fear it. A late freeze turned the snow to crusted iron. Hunters came back with nothing, and within days the settlement was out of wild game. Thomas heard the news through his frosted window. He opened the last crate in his pantry. 5 jars of pickled greens and a damp packet of spinach seeds.
If I keep these seeds, I'll have fresh food in spring. but the children are starving now.
He lifted the cloth packet, felt the weight of the seeds, and tied it shut. The dog whined at his feet. Thomas bent and scratched his ears.
They need this more than we do. The ground will give again.
He walked to the community hall and left the bundle on the threshold, steam rising around him. Back in the cabin, the pantry was dark. Only a single jar remained, and that he gave to a neighbor's child.
Now it's just the warmth and the dog.
He had given everything. The cursed ground owed him nothing. Yet it was all he had left. As the snow softened and the first meltwater trickled, Thomas walked to the steaming fissure for the first time in weeks. The dog limped beside him. A figure stood at the edge of the steam. A woman, old and still, her silver hair wet with mist. She turned. Her eyes held no surprise. She had been waiting.
You are the one who listened to the ground. My people have known this spring for more winters than you can count.
She held out a flat, dark stone. On its surface, thin lines carved a map of the spring and the old trails. Thomas took it. The stone was warm.
Every winter, we camped here. The earth never froze. The children never starved. Your people called it cursed because you did not ask.
Cursed. They called it cursed because they were too blind to see a gift.
The dog pressed close to the old woman's hand, tail wagging. Ayana stayed. By sundown, Thomas listened, really listened, to the story the spring had always held. The next dawn, the entire settlement gathered at the steaming spring. Thomas stood beside Ayana, his dog pressed against his leg.
This spring warmed my ancestors through endless winters. We carved the stone so the children would remember.
She raised the dark stone high. The wavy lines caught the steam and seemed to move.
We called it cursed. We were the blind ones.
Caleb stepped forward and knelt, pressing his open hand to the warm earth.
We ask forgiveness for our ignorance. Bless this ground so it may bless us all.
The earth needs respect, not forgiveness. I will share the blessing my grandmother sang here.
She sang in a tongue older than the mountains. The steam rose thicker, and the air grew clean. The children drew near, and her voice wrapped around them like a warm blanket. When the last note faded, the curse was gone. The land was what it had always been, a gift.
No more will this stretch of ground be called cursed. From this sunrise, we are Steam Hollow.
A murmur of assent rolled through the crowd. Then a cheer broke and scattered the crows from the pines.
And the man who trusted steam when we trusted only wood, Thomas Brennan, he stands as our first founder. Founder. I just listened to the earth.
2 men hauled a flat stone to the edge of the spring. Caleb pressed a brass plate to its face. Steam Hollow. Founded on the gift of the earth.
The stone remembers every winter. You remember now too.
Thomas knelt, the dog beside him. He ran his palm over the warm granite and felt the thrum of hot water below.
We gave it back its name. That's enough.
The spring steamed on, a white plume joining the sky, and for the first time, the settlement stood unafraid on its own ground. 4 winters passed. The man who once stood alone on a stinking hillside now sat on a porch with a steaming mug, his beard shot through with white. The dog, gray-muzzled and slow, lay at his feet, tail thumping whenever a child laughed. Below the porch, the warm runoff from the pipes melted a creek through the snow. Children splashed barefoot, their laughter rising with the steam.
They mocked the smell once. Now they play in the same water.
The dog shifted, resting his head on Thomas's leg. Neither moved for a long while. On clear mornings, every roof in Steam Hollow still whispered white plumes into the sky. Caleb had retired. Samuel ran the trading post, but Thomas stayed in his first cabin, the one built over the vent. He never expanded it, never needed to. The warmth beneath was enough.
We didn't conquer the winter. We just learned to listen.
The spring steamed on as it always had, holding the memory of every winter that came before. Thomas stood inside his cabin, watching the steam rise from the floor. Ayana's words still echoed in his mind.
The warm earth remembers those who listen.
He had trusted the ground when no one else would, but he had never been alone in that trust. The spring had been a sanctuary long before the settlement arrived. The newcomers simply hadn't asked the right questions. Now, in the community hall, children learned to read by tracing the carved stone map. Their parents told the story of the man who built his cabin over a steaming hole and gave them warmth. Thomas listened to the tales and saw his own legend growing, softened and shaped like the steam itself. He never corrected them. The truth needed no polishing. All he had done was listen to the ground, to the steam, to an old woman's song. And because he listened, the cursed swamp became the heart of a community, and winter made it priceless. A young settler, no older than 10, found Thomas standing by the stone marker on a crisp morning. His small finger traced the engraved letters with a curious touch.
Go on, read it.
The boy sounded out each word, his breath clouding in the cold. He looked up and asked if the land had truly been cursed, or if the stories were just stories.
It was never cursed. We were just too proud to see the gift it was.
The old dog, gray and slow, thumped his tail in the snow, sending up a puff of white.
The only curse was in our heads. The ground was always a gift.
The boy nodded, then sprinted toward the settlement, carrying the truth with him like a torch.
One more knows the truth. That's enough.
Thomas stood alone with the dog, the stone marker behind him catching the low winter sun, and the spring kept breathing as it had for generations. Steam Hollow settled into the valley, like it had always belonged there. Every roof breathed a thin white plume into the fading sky. The wooden mural outside the meeting hall caught the last light. The spring itself never changed. The same plume, the same heat, the same stone. On the stone marker, the brass plate glowed amber in the sunset. Footprints in the snow showed where children had come to read it, and at the heart of it all, a single cabin stood over the steaming ground, the first cabin, unchanged. Inside, steam still rose through the floorboards. The warm earth breathed on, as it always would, holding winter at bay. Lights flickered in the windows of Steam Hollow, and the valley settled into the silence of a community that had learned to trust the ground beneath its feet. The steam that had once mocked now blessed. The land that had been cursed was sacred, and at the edge of the steam, the stone marker waited for the next morning, and the next generation, and the next winter. The cabin they had mocked, the one built over the stinking, steaming fissure, now stood as the unchallenged heart of Steam Hollow. From its floor, the earth's breath still rose in quiet ribbons, just as it had on the day Thomas first pressed his palm to the warm stone. Thomas Brennan had built on faith, not foolishness. He trusted the ground beneath him when no one else would. When the hardest winter in memory froze the woodpiles and silenced the axes, that faith became the difference between life and a frozen death. The cursed swamp, once shunned and ridiculed, became the very heart of a community that survived because of it, not by magic but by patience, by a man who chose to listen when others held their noses and called him a fool. And in the end, winter made it priceless. The land was never cursed. The people were just too proud to see the gift that was right beneath their feet. They mocked him, but the steam never stopped rising, and neither did the life it sustained. The warm earth breathed on, and Steam Hollow endured. Through the frosted window of that first cabin, a steady orange glow denied the winter night. Inside, the old dog lay curled on the warm floorboards, his chest rising and falling with the steam. The steam knew no hurry. It rose in gentle ribbons, carrying the earth's promise of warmth to every corner of the small room. A pair of worn boots stood by the door, still damp from the snow. Outside, the settlement slept beneath a blanket of snow, each roof sending its thin plume into the starry sky. But in that first cabin, the heart of Steam Hollow beat on, a quiet drum of heat that asked nothing in return. Thomas sat in the old chair, his hand resting on the dog's head. He did not speak. He did not need to. The fire had long gone out, but the cabin held the heat of the earth itself. They mocked him for building his cabin over a steaming spring until winter made it priceless.